The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Open 2.0. We hope all of you are staying safe and healthy. Today we are joined by the co-founders of Teens for Press Freedom, Charlotte Hampton and Isabel Tribe. Teens for Press Freedom is a national youth-led organization dedicated to the protection of journalism and the promotion of media literacy among young people. It's great to have you here, Isabel and Charlotte. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's awesome to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice to meet you. Hi, my name is Grace. My first question is, what inspired you to create Teens for Press?
Yeah, well, Charlotte and I are both alumni of the PEN America Free Speech Advocacy Institute, which is this really cool program that we attended last summer. And basically, it was a very eye-opening experience where we learned a lot about how the press is under threat here in America and globally. And I think that is what TPF was born out of. We were really inspired to, take action directly. And so that is one of the main factors. And of course, this summer, in the midst of the national Black Lives Matter protests, we were seeing a large number of journalists being attacked by the police and censored. And we thought that we needed to do something about that and, really get this teen energy to do something and stand up for the journalists who were being attacked in Black Lives Matter protests. And then, of course, I think on a more personal level, Charlotte and I, both of our parents, Charlotte's parents are journalists, my mother's a journalist, my dad's an artist. So I think free expression is something that really means a lot to us. We were both, raised in households that placed a lot of emphasis on the press and the importance of the press. And so I think that the freedom of expression is something that we try not to take for granted.
That's really inspiring. My name is Olivia. Can you tell us more about the work you do in your organization?
Yeah, so whenever people ask us about this, I always try to break it down into this three-pronged thing that's all about kind of connecting young people and people of our generation to news and current events. The first one is we release a weekly news blast, which is just a summary of the news from the past week. So we have a news team that collects the most important stories, and that's my favorite part, because I think that having a healthy relationship with media is really important as we come of age and are becoming voters. We caught the GameStop thing so early that my mom was saying if we had all invested in GameStop shares when we first sent that out in our weekly news blast, we could have all been millionaires. But that didn't happen. We also have a workshop team which hosts workshops on Wednesdays and Sundays from 5 to 6. And it's about like a 15-minute presentation and then 45 minutes of just discussion and breaking it down. And it's really interesting. And we focus on issues of free speech primarily. Then we also have an advocacy team that works on this from a legislative angle, which I think is also very important to me. I think there's a lot of wishy-washy teen advocacy that doesn't actually do that much in the long run, but I think that if you can really bring attention to these concrete bills, and even potentially make actual efforts to help those bills get passed in the long run, that's real concrete change that you're seeing. And then we also have a press team, which we just started like 2 weeks ago, that's releasing 2 press releases this week, just so we can have TPF really stay in the know and share our position on these national issues that have to do with free expression and free speech. Yeah.
I think that's very important. My name's Lev, and I'm just wondering, how exactly do you spread awareness about this topic? And when you're doing that, who is your target audience?
Well, our target audience is teens, it's young people. I think because youth get the bulk of their news and information from social media, they're especially vulnerable to fake news and mis and disinformation online. So, really, our mission is to connect teens with accessible, verifiable information and the tools to be literate on news and know how to sort fact from fiction and, apply those critical thinking skills as they're reading the news so they don't, go down the wrong path and consume fake media as truth. And so I think we spread awareness through everything that we do. We try to spread awareness about these really important issues, whether it's talking to New Yorkers about legislation in Central Park and getting them to engage civically and write letters to their representatives in support of those bills. We've had some great conversations and debates in Central Park with lots of interesting people. So that's really exciting.
With some interesting people.
Yeah, we've met a lot of different New Yorkers. It's great. I love that. I love that kind of engagement. It's so exciting to have those conversations. I think especially during a pandemic, our workshops are something that I've really been looking forward to every week, because it's this way to outside of school still have these really important conversations, still hear everyone's opinions and discuss and debate. Our workshops are also one really critical way that we are talking about these issues and informing people and hearing everyone's ideas. So that is so much fun. And of course, our news blast goes out to, I think, 150 people. It's growing every week. So, we try to spread information about what we're doing and also what's going on in the world that way. And our outreach team helps connect youth all over the country to Teens for Press Freedom. So also very exciting there.
That's fantastic. Hi, my name is Dev. And what specific bills are you trying to pass, and why those bills?
Well, we just last week or 2 weeks ago, I think, launched this letter writing campaign in support of the Global Press Freedom Act. And I think that's where all of our legislative energies are focused on at the moment. And basically, the Global Press Freedom Act is this really cool piece of legislation that would establish an envoy of global press freedom in the State Department with an ambassador at large for press freedom that requires training for every member of the State Department, this training in the First Amendment issues, and also I think this envoy would be responsible for protecting independent media, protecting foreign journalists, protecting the press just generally at home and abroad. So it's really a point place and this accountability measure to make sure that we as the United States are standing up for press freedom, are standing up for the rights of journalists. So that is really exciting. It's a bipartisan initiative, which I think is really makes it have a lot more momentum. So it was introduced by, I think, Hawaii Senator Brian Schatz, and it's co-sponsored by Republican Senator from Indiana, Todd Young. So it has a lot more momentum behind it. And we actually think it does have a realistic chance of getting passed. And so we're working with PEN America to really build some steam around that and get people excited about it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of, there's a plus and a minus to the fact. I mean, there's a reason it's a bipartisan bill. This is an editorial comment, not a comment on behalf of TPF, just to preface this. But, I do think that the reason it's a bipartisan effort is because Republican senators are more likely to get on board with issues of free expression globally and less inclined to do it in terms of the local news crisis, because a lot of Democrats are thinking about how we can fight these corporate conglomerates that are controlling a lot of the media. I don't mean to discount mainstream media. I do very much trust mainstream media sources, but I do think that it's important to acknowledge there's a reason that this is a bipartisan bill. So while it's very important, we've sent 87 letters in support of it. It's not, we hope to go further with more later, with bills that really kind of up the ante and more progressive things that are really pushing us to support local news organizations.
Yeah, so you should definitely check out our website if you're interested. We have some more initiatives around really exciting legislation that gets into the nitty-gritties of how we can really save the local news and all these other really interesting things. That will be coming out all in due time. So if you go to our website, that's all under legislation.
Yeah, the link tax.
That's a great answer. My name is Eso, and my question is, can you define the term press freedom and explain why it's under threat?
Yeah, so generally press freedom is defined as when media outlets are free from government intervention, right? So we do have to acknowledge the fact that we do have a largely free press in the United States. The First Amendment is a largely respected part of our day-to-day life. We're not delusional. We understand that we don't live in countries like Myanmar where there is true censorship. But that doesn't mean that we have a healthy relationship to the press. And so for me, there's really this balance between, there's domestic press freedom issues, which is more about like how, and TPF is dealing with those on how young people consume media. And then there are these really high level threats to press freedom that are going on globally in countries that don't have a free press. In Myanmar, you know, the stuff that happened with Jamal Khashoggi, and this kind of stuff is happening again and again all the time. And we're still figuring out how we can tackle that as a growing organization. So we're really focused right now on domestic issues and our niche, which is about how young American teenagers can consume news in a way that makes us have a full understanding of the world rather than one that's incredibly biased and absolutist. Yeah, and I would say that, just to get back to the question, it's under threat largely because of, you know, what you were seeing over the summer, right? With the police were taking advantage of their power to assault these journalists who were trying to do their job. And, you know, I know we'll get into this later, but, you know, you saw Omar Jimenez being arrested live on CNN in Minneapolis. And I have this very visceral memory of watching that happen. And it was just like, oh my God, like the press in America really is under threat in a lot of ways. And that happened time and time again. And, you know, that kind of stuff is still kind of going on. And press freedom is also under threat in the fact that there are all of these new organizations that are parroting disinformation, like Parler. So yeah, it's very multifaceted.
That's very interesting. My name is Steve, and my question is, why is press freedom so important, and why should it matter to us as young people?
I think press freedom is really the cornerstone of a healthy, functioning democracy. There's this really great Thomas Jefferson quote that I think Charlotte and I both hold dear. He said, "Were it to me to decide whether we would have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." So we really can't emphasize enough how important press freedom is. I think so many of our rights stem from this right to free expression. It is the foundation of so many of our freedoms. And when press freedom is under threat, when press freedom is violated, that is a very slippery slope. That is so dangerous because, you know, then all of our other rights are under jeopardy. So I think, you know, bottom line, boiled down, is that press freedom is essential to our freedom.
Yeah, and I think you also really have to find the niche here that has to do with teenagers, right? Like when we were starting Teens for Press Freedom, I was really thinking you can't establish I personally believe you can't establish a youth organization that's just going to try to do what the adult organizations do, right? Like why would we just establish an organization that's that's like a wannabe committee to protect journalists? Because there are organizations who are doing this kind of work, right? So I was thinking, okay, what's our lane as young people? And that's kind of what I was getting to earlier, which is these are our formative years, right? We need to make sure that we're consuming credible news, that we're not allowing disinformation to indoctrinate us with these incredibly radical views. We need to, you know, whether that be alt-left or alt-right. In a lot of ways, there are issues, and there are issues with disinformation and misinformation on both sides. We need to make sure that we're reading the entire article. We're not just reading the quick take or the infographic that makes all these political issues lose all their nuance, right? So it's really just making sure that everyone is fully informed about these issues before they, you know, take some super grounded stance where they're not willing to compromise at all.
Hey, my name is Evan, and just building off the importance of press freedom, I saw that there were 930 violations of press. How are people able to strip something that's so fundamental?
Well, so we got the 930 violations of press freedom from the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker. Just wanted to clarify that that's where we're getting that from. So that was in 2020 alone. And the increase in press freedom, I mean, you ask an interesting question. How is that something that people are so able to strip Americans of? And I think my answer for that both has to do with President Trump and what was going on with the Black Lives Matter protests, right? The first one is that there was this rhetoric around the press and this vitriol against the press and against credible news sources for the past 4 years, right? Jim Acosta, he was thrown out of the White House press room and described as the enemy of the people by President Trump. And that wasn't an isolated incident. That was a pattern that we saw time and time again. And it was also the fact that there were these instances where the police had the power to, for whatever reason, whether they didn't want the Black Lives Matter protests to be adequately covered, whatever their reasoning was, is that they were in this position of power and they abused that time and time again, and they did that against journalists, and that's one of the reasons in 2020 that number really soared. I know Isabel and I kind of want to mention a few of these examples. There was Omar Jimenez, who I mentioned earlier, and you do have to acknowledge the fact that he's Black and Latino. I think that's just an important thing to discuss with his specific case. And then you have Josie Huang, who was a journalist she's from California, and she was attacked by the police. She posted all these videos on Twitter of the police like chasing her and throwing her to the ground after she was really just trying to report on them making attacks on people, right? This was a kind of censorship. They didn't want her to pay attention to the fact that they were making attacks on the protesters, so they also attacked her.
Yeah, and some other examples, just to name a few, because I think this is something that we don't really talk about, is, how the police really tried violently to censor the press at Black Lives Matter protests this summer. Linda Tirado was a photographer in Minneapolis. She was permanently blinded by a rubber bullet. Ed Wu was an NBC video journalist. He was pepper sprayed and beaten so badly that I think when his pictures surfaced of this incident, people were really shocked at the graphic images. And I think, it makes you question the motives of the police here. We can't say for sure, but it seems like they're trying to make sure that people can't see what they're doing, like they're smashing cameras, they're arresting reporters. Is that to, make sure that we don't have access to know what's going on at these protests, and I think that puts us in a really vulnerable position. So that is very scary. And I don't think, we can't take this seriously enough. This is really important to, acknowledge as a threat to press freedom and our own personal safety.
And those are great examples, and I see where you guys are coming from. Hi, my name is Hawa, and my question is, how has press freedom been impacted since COVID-19 and the BLM movement started?
Yeah, those are two, separate issues that have both had really different and serious impacts on press freedom. So just to start with COVID, the local news crisis, which I don't want to get into too much because we could probably talk about that all day, but the local news crisis is basically the disappearance of local newspapers in the face of social media, because they just can't compete with that. And as a result, a lot of smaller communities just don't have access to local information. And because of the economic crisis in the COVID pandemic, this really just accelerated the disappearance and death of local news, because local news organizations just really couldn't survive it. And this all was exacerbated, this lack of access to information was all exacerbated in the COVID-19 pandemic, because suddenly people didn't have access to really important health information, like, where can I get tested? Where can I get vaccinated? What are the health guidelines in my neighborhood? What are the case counts in my neighborhood? People just didn't have access to that information. So I think the pandemic really showed us why this news crisis is so important to, do something about. And then also there is on a more global level, there we saw in a lot of different countries like China and Iran and Iraq, the censorship of journalists who were trying to report on the government's COVID response. And, you know, a lot of these journalists were really critical of the government's COVID response. And that's largely the reason why their licenses were stripped, why they were removed from press conferences and, you know, directly censored. In Iraq, Reuters reporters were stripped of their licenses after they questioned the coronavirus figures. I mean, it's really scary that people wouldn't have access to this information, but here we are.
Yeah, and then I think in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, there are kind of, you know, two answers to this question. Again, I think that there are the things that were happening on the ground, right, where the police were responding to peaceful protesters violently. And, you know, that obviously gave the police the opportunity to make direct calculated attacks on these journalists, but it's also gives the government an opportunity to censor journalists directly. We had a workshop on this, how times in American history in which the press has been censored, and what you see is that it's always in times of conflict and times of war is when the government is given license to make these moves of censorship. You see that with the Alien and Sedition Acts in the late 1700s under John Adams when they might have gone to war with the French. You see that with Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, which basically meant that people couldn't speak out against the Union without being arrested. You saw that with Wilson's espionage acts during and after World War, with the new passing of a Kentucky law, which would allow, and this is its modern incarnation, it would allow police officers to arrest people for language that might lead to violence, which is obviously so subjective. You know, you can say, so basically, you don't know how that's going to turn out in Kentucky, right? Like, how is that going to give the police power to just arrest anyone who says something vaguely rude to them, and they can just say, oh, well, this law was passed. You know, I'm not an expert on the First Amendment, but I know that that is unconstitutional, and it does it does violate free speech very much so, and that's a scary thing to see happen. And it is a part of what was happening over the summer, right? It's a lot of these conservative governments responding to the Black Lives Matter protests in this way that's just totally unconstitutional.
Yeah, thank you for these responses. How can we, my name is Razel Ali, and how can we as young people get involved in the fight for press freedom?
Well, you should definitely join Teens for Press Freedom. Our membership application is live. We really, want to get as many members as possible. We really want to hear everyone's voices and have everyone incorporated into our movement. There's a lot of different levels of involvement that you can have in TPF. You can be a full-time member. You can work on many of our teams. You can also just subscribe to our news blast. I mean, it's great to have, access to that accessible, verifiable news summary that we put out every week. You can follow us on social media at Teens for Press Freedom on Instagram and Teens for Press on Twitter to stay in the loop. And you can come to our weekly workshops where we have these discussions. We have so many resources for how else you can take action, whether it's writing a letter, signing a petition, calling your representative, whatever it may be. There are so many different ways to get involved. So it's all on our website, and you should totally check it out because we'd love to have your voice.
And read the news. And honestly, that is a great way to just be kind of fulfilling TPF's mission, is staying an engaged member of American society, as we come of age and as we are able to vote. Just making sure that we're a fully informed electorate. And I think that when people get informed, they understand these issues. They understand a lot of issues better and more fully. And I think that's really all TPF is about. And our weekly email blast, I love it. I have to say, Isabel's grandparents love it. They always respond to it. So it's, yeah, and it's very accessible, it's easy to read, it's easy to understand, and that's our kind of trying to tackle this, how our political consciousness is dictated by our consumption of social media.
Thank you for the response. As teens, how can we socially and politically stay engaged in our communities?
Yeah, so I think that this is really about organizing, right? With any of these issues, you know, I think our answer to the last question was really about individual steps you can take, right? There are all these things you can do, going to our website or just staying involved with the news yourself, but then also having these conversations. But you know, and that's what TPF is really doing, right? Is we're making an attempt at this kind of community organizing. We are very much based in New York. I'd say about 35 of our 56 members, or 33, 34, I don't know. A majority of our 56 members are from New York. So it does feel like very much a community. We do have this kind of central planning, where we have a monthly meeting where we can all kind of talk about what we're feeling about press freedom and TPF stuff, because I, you know, really wanted this to feel like a central group. I didn't want it to feel like all these different teams doing different things, but, you know, one central organization, one central community at the end of the day.
I think it's great to know that you guys are in our home city. Finally, is there anything you guys would like to say to the viewers or any teen who is watching right now?
Yeah, I think just stay informed, think critically, especially when you're engaging with information online. Think critically, and challenge yourself to engage with issues outside of your sphere. You know, stay informed, read news. You know, have these conversations. Just keep talking, keep exploring, and always be critical, I think, of what you're consuming.
Yeah, and also, you know, turn on, if you watch CNN, turn on Fox, and if you watch Fox, turn on CNN. Try to, you know, I always turn on Fox and try to refute what they're saying, which I think is a good exercise, because, you know, you want to make sure, okay, yeah, like, I don't agree with this, or, you know, whatever. You want to make sure that you have a full understanding of what you're seeing, and it's not just about what you've been exposed to. You don't, like, especially, I do want to acknowledge the fact, in a lot of ways in New York, we live in a liberal bubble, right? We, you know, I don't encounter that many people who have diametrically opposed opinions to me on political issues. And that's why it's important to stay informed, so you have a full understanding of these issues and you have an understanding of why you believe what you believe. You're not just believing it because it's what you've been told to believe. So yeah, thank you so much.
We've had a great time learning about press freedom and the work you do to defend it. Charlotte and Isabel, your passion is really inspiring. Thank you for your time. And to the viewers, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Open 2.0. Bye.
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 Bye.